Good afternoon. Today's the 17th of September of 2018. That means today is Constitution Day. Now, what that means is that today the Constitution was signed by the people who created it in the Constitutional Convention, originally called the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. This was after the Revolutionary War with the Declaration of Independence. Basically 7 years of war. The Treaty of Paris came in after the American victory at Yorktown. The colonies already had an organized document, basically, which was called the Articles of Confederation, but it was seen as a weak document that really didn't address the main challenges that the new nation was going through, or that it was not a document seen as a proper law of the land to be followed by. So there were a lot of years after the Revolutionary War, after 1783, where it was seen that the Articles of Confederation were not good documents. So in 1787, eventually, mainly through the efforts of two young men at the time named James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, they managed to get George Washington to preside over what was then called the Philadelphia Convention, but then eventually we now know it today as the Constitutional Convention, which was originally to amend the Articles of Confederation. Eventually they scrapped that altogether and they created a new document which we now know as the Constitution of the United States. It's the law of the land. It's supposed to be the document that we are supposed to uphold, to defend, when politicians and, ambassadors, agents, when they take an oath, military as well, of course. When they take an oath, they don't take an oath to a king or queen, as some countries do, or to a president, or even to a Congress. They swear an oath to the Constitution. So I'm just going to give a brief and a simplified explanation, if I can, of the Constitution and what it is and what it has in it. And I'll see. This is one of my first videos, so forgive me if I'm not fluid with my language. Bear with me, please. But to do that, let's see how everything started. So as we all know, the United States was founded on the 4th of July, 1776 by the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration is basically the charter document of the United States, which states, what laws have been broken, what rights and freedoms were lost, and how they will be brought back eventually. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and how we'll govern ourselves in the future. Now, that's a very simple explanation of the Declaration, but that's basically what it's about. And during the Revolutionary War, a law of the land was created. This is called Articles of Confederation. So basically, it was our law of the land at the time. It was supposed to be like a confederacy, like every state is recognized as individual sovereign states in a union, even though in this case it's a very loose union. It wasn't very organized to pay debts, to assure states' rights eventually. Not a good unifying document. It needed changes, improvements, and amendments, as some people said. Because after, like I just said earlier, after the war, there wasn't a really good way to organize the nation and to address its problems in the post-war era. So that's why eventually in Philadelphia in 1787, they started to get a convention together after previous conventions failed. This one succeeded because it had the general of the Continental Army, George Washington, who, even though after 7 years as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, this man just wanted to, go back to Virginia, live a simple life, stay out of public appearances, basically stay out of public life and live the rest of his life in peace in Mount Vernon, Virginia. But eventually it came to him, I believe it was James Madison who spoke to him primarily, but Alexander Hamilton might have played a part as well, in convincing him to chair this convention to create a document, a well-organized document that would address the central government, that would create the central government, and that would provide like a Senate in Roman times, or like a parliament in Britain that the colonists previously looked up to before Revolutionary War, but their own revolutionary kind of document of government, a new federal government that would be groundbreaking and examples to the world. So George Washington decides to chair this convention. He wouldn't speak much, but he would listen a lot. And eventually James Madison and Alexander Hamilton got to work on the Constitution here. Now, before we get confused, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, those guys who helped to draft the Declaration of Independence along with Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, and Robert Livingston, they were not involved in the drafting of the Constitution, in writing it. Jefferson was serving as ambassador to France at the time, replacing Ben Franklin, who was just coming back to the United States. And John Adams was the ambassador to the United Kingdom. So they were abroad while this constitutional convention was occurring in Philadelphia. Okay, so eventually they got together. It was a very warm summer, but eventually, after months of debating and organizing, they got to a deal that created this Constitution. So this is what the Constitution is. It's the law of the land, it's the bylaws document, and it establishes how we'll govern ourselves. Now, these are the first words of the Constitution, and it goes like this. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, to promote the general welfare, and to ensure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do and ordain this Constitution of the United States of America. Okay, so after that, basically, it represents that this is how we'll govern ourselves. We're going to form a stronger union to unite the states, to establish justice, true justice, ensure peace, provide a strong defense, the armed forces, promote freedom of establishing businesses, partnerships of the people, to make good choices with little government influence, right to have land, to provide liberty for the people and posterity, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Because this Constitution basically, the principles of the Declaration of Independence are supposed to flow into the Constitution. So, basically the Constitution, it splits the government into three parts. You have the legislative branch, which is Congress, the executive branch, which is the president, and the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. Okay, so let me get alrighty. So, as we all know, Congress is probably the most well-known branch. It is the legislative branch. It is supposed to be the most important one, as it is the one closest to the people. Congress is divided into two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Nowadays, in 2018, we have 435 House Representatives, and we have 100 senators, making that a total of 535 congressmen. The House of Representatives is more beneficial to the bigger states. the ones with the most population, because the most populous states have the most members and therefore have the most votes, and it's slightly more powerful than the Senate. And the Senate is more beneficial to the smaller states, as every state has 2 senators. And this house is presided by the vice president. The Senate is provided by the vice president, and the House of Representatives is presided by the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the third most powerful person in the government, other than the president and the vice president. So, anyway, back to Constitution. The purposes and the jobs that Congress is responsible for are to coin and borrow money, to impeach the president if necessary, to levy taxes, to regulate immigration, to set up the post office and roads, to create an environment for good commerce, to regulate commerce, to maintain the army, the navy, military, the armed forces, to declare war, and to oversee the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Okay, and also they must make limited laws to the purposes of the Constitution, which basically means they debate bills which have to be approved by, I believe, 2/3 of the House and the Senate. And if they're approved on both the House and the Senate, the bill is then sent to the president, where he can either sign it into law or he can veto it and send it back to Congress to vote it again. Okay, so that is the Congress's job. That's the legislative branch. And now we go to the executive branch, which is the president. His job is to be the commander-in-chief, to enforce the laws of the United States, to appoint ambassadors, judges, and officers, to grant pardons, to give the State of the Union to Congress, to sign treaties and receive ambassadors, to uphold the Constitution, and to interpret the Constitution. Of course, these days, with the advance of travel, the president can now host foreign leaders instead of just ambassadors, as it would be in that time, 1787, when the Constitution was signed. Okay, so the judicial branch, the weakest branch of the federal government, the Supreme Court, the smallest and least powerful of the branches of government. Their job is to take appeals from citizens, courts, and the states, to make principled judgments, to ensure jury trials, to uphold the Constitution, and to interpret the Constitution. The Congress can also impeach judges and not just the president. All three branches are to uphold and interpret the Constitution. In a balance of power over court, Congress establishes jurisdiction of the court. So this is basically a checks and balances, that not one branch rule the others or have absolute domination over DC. And basically that means that not one person can have all the power. No president can have the power that an absolute monarch could, or the legislative branch could have an absolute power, like maybe what Parliament decided for the colonies in years before the Declaration of Independence, with the Stamp Act, the taxes on tea, that people needed to use these Bank of England issued notes instead of the autonomous currency that the colonies were using at the time. Silver-backed currencies. So this is basically checks and balances, so that if a president or a judge gets too powerful, then what the Congress does is they can impeach that person, and that sort of keeps the checks and balances in place, because there's no quote that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. and this is what it's supposed to keep this nation from becoming the kind of tyranny, oligarchy, that many of the colonists perceived that Britain and the Parliament and the King to be. Okay, so the Constitution was signed on September 17, 1787, but there were still problems over, it addressed the federal government, but there were people who believed that didn't address the states, the state sovereignty, and people like Thomas Jefferson from, writing letters from France, they were concerned about this. So eventually James Madison got to work on a Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights basically are amendments to the Constitution that put limits on this federal government that was established by the Constitution. So I'm just going to go through the original Bill of Rights here. Of course, there's 27 nowadays, but I'm only going to go through the original 10 for today. So, First Amendment. Congress shall make no law banning freedom of speech, press, religion, peaceful assembly, and petition the government for various grievances. Basically, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of peaceful assembly, and to petition the government for various grievances. Second Amendment. The people have the right to bear arms against potentially tyrannical governments if the Constitution shall fail one day and, a part of the government gets too powerful, they want to take the weapons away, like what happened at Lexington and Concord. So the people have the right to keep and bear arms to defend themselves, their families, their liberty, their property. Third Amendment. No soldier quartered in homes in peace or war without the homeowner's consent. So no soldier can be quartered in someone's homes. This was an issue before Declaration of Independence, when Boston was put under martial law, basically, and British soldiers were being quartered in their homes without their consent. So this is supposed to prevent that in the future. So in neither peace or war shall any soldier be quartered in a home without the homeowner's consent. Fourth Amendment. No searches, seizures of property without a warrant, without a federal warrant that can be obtained by a federal judge. And that explains and the agent there has to explain the name of the homeowner and of what exactly they need to seize from that home. So in a more simplified way, if an agent believes that this person might have committed a crime or has evidence or something, if they need to conduct the seizure for any reason at all, they have to go into a federal court, have an oath describing the person and the objects to be seized, and that basically. Okay, so they go into the home afterwards, and they have the warrant, and this basically shows that this is proof from the federal court that we have the permission to search you, Mr. Whatever the name of the person might be, and the objects that need to be seized, because the United States wanted to be a nation that respected the life, liberty, and property of the individual. Okay, so Fifth Amendment. The accused will be forced to, in criminal courses, to a fair judicial treatment and no double criminality for the same offense. So this person can be tried. He can't be tried twice for the same offense. He has the right to a fair trial, and he basically has rights in court. Sixth Amendment. Allow a speedy and public trial by jury, rights of the accused and witnesses for for and against the accuser. Right to an attorney. Seventh Amendment, civil trial by jury, which is basically the lawyers make their statements, both the prosecution and defense, and the jury, they advise they make their statements known. It goes to the jury, and the jury then advises the judge over the final verdict. Eighth Amendment, no cruel or excessive bails or fines allowed. Basically, no excessive jail time or fines or or time for bail. No excessive bail for the accused according to the crime that has been committed to him. This was okay. So Ninth Amendment, the protection of all rights mentioned in the Constitution. So all rights and liberties that are mentioned in the Constitution should not be annulled. They stay put. That means they cannot be annulled by any means. And the 10th Amendment, all rights and liberties that are not in the Constitution are left to the states respectively and to the people. So that's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. I sort of struggled a little there with the Bill of Rights, but I hope you got the message. So, like I said, today's the 17th of September. It's Constitution Day. The Constitution was signed into law. I always like to include the Bill of Rights along with the Constitution when I'm making an explanation, because I feel like the two go hand in hand in making and organizing a document, a law of the land that is dignified, of a society that's supposed to be free, that's supposed to be prosperous, and that's supposed to be guaranteeing the rights of the citizens. And of course, the Bill of Rights went okay with people like Jefferson and others that in the states that were concerned that the federal government was making the Constitution was making the federal government too powerful, but the Bill of Rights was seen as a counter that to ensure the rights of the accused, of the laws, of the individual person, and of course the states. So that went well, and so the Constitution and the Bill of Rights go together. Remember, the Declaration flows into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So there's my explanation. I believe today was a more appropriate day than any other to explain this, and I hope I did a good job on it. This is one of the first few videos I've done, so hopefully it went well. And remember why this nation was founded. Remember the law of the land that this nation is run by. Remember that any oath that you might take as a politician, as a federal agent, as a member of the military, you swear an oath to the Constitution and to its amendments. So happy Constitution Day. Hope you have a nice day. Thank you.